In recent weeks, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has sharply escalated rhetoric around domestic security, asserting that the National Guard will be expanded to every city we possibly can in response to what she describes as rising violence and threats. Her comments come against the backdrop of a high-profile shooting that targeted National Guard members on duty in Washington, D.C., a dramatic incident that has intensified debate over the use of federal troops in American cities. This article breaks down what Bondi's threat means, how it fits into a larger political and security strategy, and why so many are both alarmed and watching closely. During a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing and other press appearances, Bondi defended the Trump administration's increasing use of the National Guard not as a temporary measure, but as a new baseline for public safety reinforcement. Key highlights of her stance. She announced that the Guard presence would increase rather than decrease, vowing to deploy troops to every city we possibly can who needs our help. Bondi emphasized that this surge would support local law enforcement in cities deemed to have high crime rates or public safety challenges. She justified the deployments as necessary to protect citizens, federal property, and to address what she described as a pattern of violent crime and threats against federal personnel, including immigration agents. When challenged by senators over whether this is a good best practice, Bondi pushed back, arguing that failure to act is more dangerous than deploying troops. She told Democrats that if you're not going to protect your citizens, President Trump will. The flashpoint for Bondi's renewed push was a violent ambush that left one National Guard member dead and another critically wounded near the White House. The suspect, identified as an Afghan national, has ties to U.S. agencies in Afghanistan and entered the country under the resettlement program. Bondi reacted forcefully. On television, she labeled critics of the Guard presence progressive left idiots for allegedly fueling hostility toward troops. She announced that the Justice Department would seek the death penalty against the shooter, calling him a monster and a terrorist. With the shooting underscoring security concerns in the Capitol, Bondi argues that expanding the National Guard is not just a policy choice, but a necessity for public safety and a matter of protecting federal and local cities from potential threats. The expansion of the National Guard isn't happening in isolation. Bondi and the administration have rolled out a multi-city, multi-agency enforcement approach. In Memphis, for instance, National Guard troops have been deputized along with federal officers under a task force set to conduct arrests and enforce warrants. Bondi underscored this as part of a broader push beyond local policing. Cities such as Chicago, Portland, and Los Angeles have been expressly mentioned as potential next targets for deployment. Bondi has framed this as a matter of federal responsibility when local governments allegedly fail to maintain safety. Bondi defended the actions as reassertions of rule of law, arguing that the DOJ and the federal government are responding to rising pressures and, quote, weaponization of criminal justice under prior administrations. Unsurprisingly, Bondi's stance and the administration's campaign to expand National Guard deployment have drawn strong criticism from a spectrum of civil rights advocates, local officials, and lawmakers. Senate questions and institutional concerns. During a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, lawmakers such as Sen. Dick Durbin of Illinois demanded clarity on the legal basis for deploying troops in cities like Chicago, questioning whether federal law allows such widespread militarization of local policing. Bondi declined to provide details on White House conversations regarding troop deployments and instead criticized the questioning senators. Senator Tennessee's Tom Tillis, even from the Republican side, asked whether dispatching troops should be considered a best practice. Bondi's response that Guard troops would be where they have to be for public safety drew concern about long-term militarization of domestic law enforcement. Civil rights and local autonomy. Opponents argue that relying on National Guard troops for city policing undermines the principle of local control. In cities with minority-majority populations, there are fears this could lead to over-policing, civil liberties violations, or disproportionate targeting of marginalized communities rather than addressing root causes of violence, such as poverty and lack of opportunity. precedent and the risk of normalization. Critics also warn that turning to military-style deployments as routine crime response dangerously blurs the line between policing and war fighting. Once normalized, such deployments could transform local governance and erode public trust in civil institutions. Also, some civil rights groups argue that crime and violence are better addressed through social programs, improved education, housing, employment, rather than armed troops. They call the Guard deployment a band-aid that ignores systemic issues. Pam Bondi's aggressive posture on expanding the National Guard is part of a broader shift in how the current administration views domestic security and federal authority. Number one, federal supremacy over local governance. The move signals an embrace of federal intervention in city-level law enforcement, implying that when local governments fail or are deemed politically opposed, Washington will step in. This challenges traditional norms of municipal autonomy and local accountability. Number two, public safety as a political mandate. By framing the Guard expansion as a response to violent crime and threats, the administration redefines public safety, emphasizing enforcement, deterrence, and federal power over rehabilitation or community-based solutions. Number three, use of crisis to justify permanent deployment. The recent shooting of Guard troops is being used to justify sustained troop deployments. Whether eventual surges become a long-term strategy remains uncertain, and that uncertainty worries civil liberties advocates. Number four, polarization and government messaging. Bondi's emotionally charged language, labeling critics as progressive left idiots, reflects a wider partisan framing of security issues. This rhetoric is likely meant to rally supporters, but also deepens the divide over how the country addresses violence, immigration, and federal power. As the debate unfolds, several developments will be critical in shaping how this plays out. Military presence in cities. Which cities will next see Guard deployment? Will states and local governments resist or cooperate? Legal battles over jurisdiction and constitutionality are likely. Effectiveness versus rights. Will Guard deployments reduce crime convincingly, or will they exacerbate racial or civil liberties tensions? Monitoring statistics and civil liberties complaints will be central. Senate oversight and congressional action. The expanding role of the federal government in local policing may prompt legislative pushback. Oversight hearings and possible reform bills are on the horizon. Public reaction and protests. With increasing military presence on the streets, protests or civil unrest may rise, especially if Guard actions are perceived as heavy-handed or discriminatory. Long-term impact on governance. The normalization of Guard deployments could permanently shift the balance of power between the federal government, states, and municipalities. Pam Bondi's warning that the National Guard will spread to every city we possibly can marks a major inflection point in U.S. domestic policy. What began as targeted deployments to address crises such as violence, threats, or security incidents now appears to be morphing into a broader strategy of federal intervention in local law enforcement. For supporters of stricter law and order, wounded troops, and federal strength, Bondi's message offers clarity and resolves. But for advocates of civil rights, local autonomy, and systemic approaches to crime, the expansion of the Guard threatens to erode community trust, escalate militarization, and undermine centuries-old norms of American policing. As the country watches, the next few weeks and months could determine whether this push becomes a temporary crackdown or a permanent reconfiguration of public safety in the United States.